It is Friday, February 14th. Let's talk PlayStation. So starting off real quick, I just want to mention this is Let's Talk PlayStation episode 400. I've been doing this every single week since June 22nd, 2012. Thank you so much for watching, whether it was back then or just recently. Thank you. We'll do a post discussion at the end of the video and like a little surprise at the end, so stay tuned for that. But first, let's start with our PlayStation Plus reminder. February games are Sims 4, Bioshock Collection, Firewall 0 Hour. Plenty of time to grab these games or add them to your library. First off, just a small reminder. Sony posted a little FYI this past week that the Sunset Orange controller and the Berry Blue are restocked in North America, so US and Canada short supplies, but whenever they do these specialized DualShock 4 controllers, they don't stick around for too long, and that Berry Blue is just such a wild color. I love it. So I think if you are interested, get these controllers now while they last. Also, today is Dream's official release date. You can finally buy the game at retail, or if you were part of the early access, you actually were given full access to the game a little few days prior to today, but otherwise the game's officially out, and I always feel the need to talk about Dreams because, well, Sony won't. It's just such a understandably niche game, but it is fantastic. There's amazing things you can do with it. That little single player that they built is really... You can really get lost in it easily. It really is somewhat mesmerizing. And the early reviews are looking really good, like a 91 on Metacritic, so definitely a great game. But remember, Media Molecule hasn't put out a full big budget game since Little Big Planet 2 in 2011. I mean, they did Tearaway as a small team, then they fielded out Tearaway Unfolded. That was like a joint venture. They contracted a lot of that out. So yeah, obviously they have spent a lot of money and resources on Dreams. So the game is available now. If it even interests you a little bit, give it a shot. Now, getting into our PS5 stuff first, let's cover this image. This came up this past week, and it looks like a Japanese product page of the PlayStation site. On the top, you can see the row of PlayStation icons for the family of consoles, and now there's a little PS5 logo there. Allegedly, this showed up for a short while, then was taken down. This probably fake. We can see this one a mile away. I think this originated on Reddit, and so many people actually ran with this and made their own versions of this just to demonstrate how easily you can fake something like this. So once again, as we cautioned, Sony's not talking about PS5, but there are PS5 leaks everywhere from people that want to get a little bit of attention, so this probably was not at all real. But now let's get into our major PlayStation 5 news, and this is very recent. I'm talking, as I'm filming this right now, the story just broke out, so by the time this is uploaded, we may have more details, but this is coming from Bloomberg. Apparently some very good sources. They are claiming this is from a lot of people that are higher up at Sony, obviously going unnamed because they're just so close to the details of everything related here. But it is being reported that PlayStation 5 components are adding up to about $450 to manufacture. Most of the parts being supplied to make the console are already finalized, and that a lot of this is taking place pretty much right now in the month of February, and that Sony is taking a wait-and-see approach in terms of how they want to price the console. Now, this is very eye-opening because we just had a report from Sony's CFO, Hiroki Toki, mentioning that the company is still undecided on pricing PS5, and even going a little bit into detail about the things that they're taking into consideration, right? Like the amount of units that they're going to manufacture, labor costs, how much cost they're willing to take, kind of implying that they might take a loss like a console manufacturer typically does. But that was our previous news story, right? So that mirrors what we're hearing right now from Bloomberg, that Sony is taking a wait-and-see approach. And apparently a lot of people at the company are voicing this, that they are basically waiting to see what happens. And definitely this is in reference to what Microsoft might potentially do, how they might price Xbox Series X. Some of the other details in this report claims that the fan, for example, is actually higher priced this time around, whereas previously or in other electronics, the fan would be less than $1, for example. But apparently for PlayStation 5, this particular component is going to be a few dollars per unit, so that is actually a bit higher. They're also stating that the coronavirus right now is not having any major role or effect in the manufacturing process that will start potentially in the spring. They also claim a new PlayStation VR will be scheduled for a later date past the initial PlayStation 5 launch. Supposedly, there's also a supply constraint going on with some of the parts, namely DRAM and NAND flash. And this is mostly because of, well, just the marketplace in general. There's so many smartphones demanding these parts. So that might be something that Sony has an issue with, apparently. It's also being noted that there are certain features in a new mirrorless camera that Sony's launching this year will have to be, basically the features will have to be removed because they won't be able to supply enough DRAM to this particular camera that they're going to be releasing this year. Many people familiar with the matter and that are close to Sony's day-to-day operations have said, though, it is a waiting game with seeing what Microsoft's pricing strategy will be with Xbox Series X. They also state for the transitional period, they do expect it to be very gradual because so many games will be available on PS4 and PS5, but that a lot of the revenue from PSN, subscription services, will be enough to sustain day-to-day operations. And that's pretty much everything that came out of this Bloomberg report. Now, this is very interesting for a number of reasons. I think the price that we all have talked about and theorized for so long is $499. It kind of always read that it would have been $499, that it would have been a very premium device this time around. Mark Cerny kind of implied that people would be okay with it in light of its advanced features. I think we all read that as a higher price than PlayStation 4. But hearing a potential manufacturing cost of $450 actually puts this in two weird spectrums where, okay, typically a console, the manufacturer takes a loss. That's pretty typical, and even Sony did this with PlayStation 4. I know there are some reports initially that manufacturing of PS4 was $380 per unit, but really Sony still took a loss on PS4 initially. However, they started becoming profitable with PS4 about 6 months after launch. So it was like around May or June 2014 where Kaz Hirai openly stated PS4 is already a profitable machine. But initially it was either right on the cusp of break even or a little bit over to where the company took a loss. So this time around, it's a scenario where, well, what end of the spectrum are we looking at here? Because I know the conversation is going to go right to the GitHub leak, right to PS5 versus Series X in terms of power, performance, which there's still no major update in relation to that. There's still no proof whatsoever regarding which one's more powerful than the other. Just a bunch of people barking at each other. But looking at this, what does this mean? Does this mean that Sony is willing to take a loss and they want to sell it at $400 and $50 is just a bit too steep and they're uncomfortable with taking a loss, that much of a loss per unit? Or is it really, as powerful as we hear, where it's a really great machine, it's going to be fantastic, but they were actually aiming to earn a pretty considerable profit right off the bat? And especially the part about the fan, where this is a part that normally is a little under $1, whereas now it's a few dollars because Sony really wants to make sure that the console is properly cooled. That actually will tell you, because some people still seem to not understand this, but this is how low prices can get when you're manufacturing a product at a huge scale like this. So even though we're hearing a $450 manufacturing cost, that doesn't tell you that the console is extremely underpowered, because I know people are going to go right to that. We don't know what prices they've secured with their suppliers. We don't know. So it may be very favorable for them, or it might be not so favorable to where it is more underpowered than we would initially think, right? But it's a complete unknown. In fact, $450 as a manufacturing cost is like the worst number we could have got, because it doesn't lean in one particular direction in terms of what Sony may be comfortable taking a loss on or what Sony might be comfortable earning a profit on. And this is all amplified even more by the potential of Sony waiting for Microsoft's pricing strategy, because what does that really mean? Are they trying to price match Series X? Are they trying to undercut them? We still need to see the full Microsoft plan here, which we're assuming still includes the rumored Lockhart system, the entry-level box, which will presumably be less powerful than PlayStation 5, coming at a considerably lower price. Maybe that would start at $399 or maybe $349. Like, there's just so much at play here. What is Sony trying to do in terms of what Microsoft's trying to do, and how are they trying to find their place in the market? Are we looking at a situation now where we're looking at a $399 PS5, sub $349 Series S, and then a $499 Series X or a $599 Series X? We're not hearing anything on the Microsoft side of things with manufacturing costs, mind you, so that's still completely up in the air. But it's an interesting report, but honestly, this still leaves a lot of unknowns. You know, as bad as the potential $450 manufacturing cost is in terms of speculation, you know, what we're doing right now, it's probably more of an ideal scenario for Sony, I'd imagine, just that it is so difficult to decide the price. I think that's why this article is reading that it's hard for Sony to decide. I think that's why the CFO said they're undecided on where they should price this thing, because they are in a pretty perfect middle ground where they could either price match at $500 and take an initial $50 profit right away, which is very good and healthy for the company, or if need be, they'll eat a $50 loss, which they don't really want to do, but if they have to, they will do that, pricing it at a very competitive, attractive $399 price, given everything that we've heard about it so far, which, again, in terms of the power performance thing, we don't know what prices where Sony's getting the manufacturing at. Microsoft may be paying more, they may be paying less. It really depends on the terms put in place, the die sizes, the size of the box. There's so much at play. There's so many unknowns. It's not even really worth talking about. We just don't know. But with everything that's falling in place, Sony could be in a very good spot, and I think that's why they're playing the waiting game right now. Moving on, during an SEC filing, it was revealed how much Sony reportedly paid for Insomniac games. And this is something we don't get to talk about too often, but during the SEC filing, it was revealed that Sony paid $229 million, mostly cash, to acquire Insomniac. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people talk about this, talking about how it's a bargain. It was a great steal. They thought it would have been more. Bringing up two recent examples. For example, EA acquiring Respawn at $400 million. I think Microsoft also paid $350 million for Rare, and they're saying that, well, in comparison to that, this was a steal. Now, the one thing people are kind of ignoring here is in the SEC filing, it breaks down the goodwill versus the true market value of Insomniac. So the goodwill is kind of a financial term that implies more of the intangible aspects of the company, right? The recognition that it deserves, what it commands in its field, and so the remaining amount would have been the true market value of Insomniac, which was around $62 million. The goodwill was $165 million. So this actually puts into perspective that what Insomniac really brought to the table in terms of, you know, the company's value and assets was around $60 million, whereas their potential and their name and what they're capable of was well worth more than that at $165 million. Now, I don't know the breakdowns for something like Respawn or Rare or even any other developer that has been acquired in recent years, but a lot of it has to deal with, you know, what they actually have, right? IP, for example. Now, Insomniac does not have many IP, actually. They went independent for a little bit, but a vast majority of their career as a developer has been making Sony IP. So that's why it might appear pretty low, not just in terms of their assets, but also the goodwill. And that's why it appears as though they should have costed a lot more, which, to be fair, it is technically still a bargain, right? Ignoring what that breakdown aside, the next game they pump out is going to produce millions and millions of dollars. So this, of course, was still a very good get for Sony. Now they're part of the PlayStation family. Insomniac has that security, and now they can just focus on making great games. Anyway, let's move on to another news story. This one's a bit old. I wasn't able to catch this on LTPS last week. It just came out right after. But it was a new patent that Sony filed for a resource suggestion system. And this goes in line with a number of patents we've had recently regarding Sony using virtual assistants in terms of a smartphone app or on the PlayStation, actual hardware or the controller having a microphone so you can talk to it. It seems like we've got a row of patents all falling in line here. And this one has been a bit more concerning for certain people because of the image they used. So basically this patent suggests that let's say you're playing a game, you ask the system, hey PlayStation, how do you defeat this boss? The virtual assistant will respond, 80% of players like you used this item to defeat this boss, and then on the TV screen in the illustration it says, here's this resource, press X to buy. And that's where people are getting a little carried away and saying, whoa, is this Sony pushing microtransactions? Which I think is going a bit too far, considering that it could just easily be an in-game currency like any sort of RPG game that you've ever played has. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it could be a microtransaction, although in all certainty it definitely could be, right? But I think this is a bit on the fear-mongering end when it comes to, oh my god, Sony's pushing microtransactions. Although I do think it's a bit disingenuous at this point to say, oh, it's a patent, it may never come out. At this point, we've seen a lot of patents regarding AI and virtual assistants on PlayStation hardware. Of course, they're using PS4s as examples and all the images. They're using the current smartphone app. But it seems very apparent to me that Sony is building something that is a lot more refined, a lot more sophisticated, that could be built at an OS level in PlayStation 5, could be a part of an updated smartphone app. The controller can have a microphone built in, so you don't even have to plug in a headset or anything like that. Everybody just has immediate system level access to this AI that can help you find things, defeat things, take on commands like an Amazon Alexa, for example. It seems like the company is exploring this in a very big way. If it becomes a real thing, who knows? Now, for our next news story, we got an update on The Last of Us Part II, which is good. Naughty Dog has told us that they are putting the finishing touches on the game, so I think that's them low-key saying, hey, we're going to hit our release date, so don't worry about any impending delay or anything like that. The game will be playable at PAX East, so like we mentioned earlier, we're going to be looking at a lot of shows like this now, where even though Sony goes to PAX East all the time, they did say they're not going to E3 to do more consumer-focused shows. They did release a list of all the games that will be at PAX East, the big ones, Last of Us, but also Final Fantasy VII Remake. But it's just a bunch of upcoming PS4 games, so I'm not expecting PS5 stuff, but we will still keep our eyes on these smaller events. Also on Twitter, there was a leaked clip of Ellie's workbench working on crafting some items, and it's such a small clip, but God, if it doesn't get you excited. It just looks so good. Honestly, the sound design, I think, is most impressive in this clip. Just typical Naughty Dog attention to detail. It looks so good. I'm getting excited. Now, if you remember, a month and a half ago, we talked about the Nintendo PlayStation prototype that the owner is going to be putting up for auction. Well, the auction is now live. And at the start of the day, when I checked it, it was at $52,000. But as of right now, it's at $310,000 with still 20-something days left in the auction. Remember, the owner initially denied a few $1 million offers, I think, or somewhere in the high $700,000 to $800,000, and he thinks he can get more for it here. I think that's going to be the case. And just throwing it out there, if you forgot and you have the money to blow, there you go. We'll give you the update when this thing sells, and we'll talk about what it actually went for. Now, moving on, this isn't really a news story, but I think it's a very good point worth bringing up. A lot of people are talking about GDC coming up, and that's actually very important because we're still waiting for a PS5 reveal, right? And I'm not saying we're going to get a PS5 reveal at GDC, but it is a thing where GDC might be a place where we'll get a lot of leaks and discussion coming out of it. That's the thing, is that we're, 2 weeks into February now, no PS5 in sight. And who even knows at this point if it will be a 2-hour some odd press reveal. Maybe it will be a state of play showing the controller first, then some launch games on a blog post or the YouTube channel. Maybe it'll be another Wired.com article. At this point, it's anybody's guess how Sony wants to approach showing PlayStation 5. There still has to be something pretty substantial of some sort, right? But not necessarily that PS5 will be at GDC. That doesn't really fit the bill too much. Maybe, but I don't know. Point being, though, GDC will be a place where, and I sincerely mean this, it is a place where you're going to have a lot of developers together from tons of different teams all across the world. There's going to be after parties. There's going to be drinking. This is very typical. Things leak out of GDC all the time because people talk, and that stuff is going to hit the internet. So this is something where if we don't hear about PS5 before GDC, GDC might be a fantastic place for us to actually get some juicy details coming out about Sony's strategy and plans moving forward. I mean, we just had this Bloomberg report, and we're not even at GDC yet, so I think we're going to get a few more sources close to Sony as this information trickles down to lower-level employees, as it climbs its way down the food chain, as Sony gets closer to PS5, and most of the PlayStation team has to be briefed on the plans. The likelihood of this information coming out, well, increases dramatically. So I know every single week we're just dying for PS5 stuff, but we will get there. And if we don't, GDC, I think, will come in and save the day on that front. Now let's get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I'd like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. Now, if you would like to win a $10 PlayStation Network code, we do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Follow the link down below to the Gleam website. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I will announce the winner next week. I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are some of the news stories that I want to talk about you all. On Tuesday, we did PS4 leaks and rumors. So we go over, what was right and what was wrong about PS4 before that came out, and we do a post discussion about how we can interpret PS5 leaks and rumors moving forward. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is Let's Talk PlayStation, episode 400. I've been doing this for a very long time, and one tradition that we've actually done every 100 episodes, if you don't know, is we take a look at what we did on the last episode. So let's see what we did for episode 300. But just for the hell of it, let's actually take a look at what we did for episode 200. And just for the hell of it, let's actually look at what we did for episode 100. And just for the hell of it, let's take a look at episode 1. Roll it. The game. So now we know a little bit more about it. And stop it. Whoa, okay. Looks like I got a little bit better at this YouTube thing, huh? Alright, I think I'm getting a little better at this YouTube thing. If you haven't picked up on it by now, I'm pretty much going to do this every 100 episodes. So yeah, that clip's getting a bit too long. We have to move that to the end of the show. But rest assured, we will do that every single episode until it takes minutes to get through. But yes, I have been doing this for 400 weeks in a row, which is nuts because within the last year, the channel got like tons of new subscribers, a lot of viewers that recently just found this channel, and you're so kind, saying how much you enjoy the videos, how much you see how much work is put into them, and you really appreciate it. It does. Whenever you say something nice, it goes a long way for me. I really appreciate it. I really do. Especially for somebody that's been doing YouTube this long. There's not many channels that consistently do anything for nearly 8 years now. So it's very encouraging to hear everybody being so kind. So thank you, and I sincerely mean that. Tuesday's video. I don't know what it is, but be there on Tuesday. There will always be something there. And that is it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.